Hey, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for coming back to listen to this one. It's been just about, I don't know, 25 episodes, maybe 8 or 9 months since I last spoke to you about narcissism and diagnostics. And this episode's going to get pretty real, pretty serious. I almost, thought about throwing on the old shirt and tie. That's how serious this is. But for those of you watching on the YouTube, you can see the seriousness. I've got the smart glasses on today, um, and I changed the picture behind me. We've got Jordan, the great and powerful. That's right, Dr. Peterson sitting behind me, hopefully guiding my words today to help inform and elucidate some of these topics. The reason why we are revisiting narcissism, and not just narcissism, but personality disorders, the diagnostic and statistical manual, and those topics today, is because back in episode 65, when we recorded that, it didn't necessarily change the world like I thought it would. Okay. So it keeps coming up, and actually, a previous guest of the show approached me a few weeks ago and asked some really serious questions about narcissism and personality disorders and diagnostics, and we had a great chat. And I figured, it would be worthwhile to come back to this. So I even, and I think I've threatened myself with this for quite a while now, and I finally had to follow through with purchasing a copy of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, version 5, TR, which I can't remember what the T means, but it is truly revised. I don't know, revised and updated just last year in 2022. The initial DSM-5 came out maybe about 10 years ago, and they since updated it last year. The much maligned DSM-5, a lot of dissent and a lot of books out there about why people don't necessarily like that. And I'll tell you a few reasons why, right? I mean, it is supposed to be the big book of our profession, written by the American Psychiatric Association, so that we can put labels on people and diagnose them. And there you go, right there. That's one reason maybe why um, I'm not a big fan of it. Uh, as you know, as a logotherapist, I work mostly in my coaching and in therapy in treating the whole person, seeing the whole person in a system, as a system: mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, vocational, and relational. And diagnosing is about reducing people, matching those criteria, and then reducing them to a label and even a 3 or 4 digit code. And that just, I understand, as human beings, we want to understand ourselves in the most simple way possible. And that's where diagnostics certainly help. But in other ways, I feel like it can cause some difficulties. The other thing about the most recent, and this is pretty well publicized since the DSM-5 came out, but certainly in the revised edition, um, I'll be damned if we're not all sick now, according to the DSM. Um, it really it encapsulates just about everything, so that any slight discomfort or issue you might experience in the mental, emotional, and in so many realms, quite honestly, because it is a giant book and it really covers a lot. Um, we're all ill in a different way according to that. And, you know, I disagree with that, right? We are all in some way, it seems, searching for meaning. And after the events of the past 3 years, or the events of our lives, um, we're all a little messed up. Maybe it's not even messed up. Maybe we're all seeking, searching, looking for something better, and experience the existential dynamics of trying to get there. Um, but the diagnostic manual does what it's supposed to, and tells us all, well, that is the subject of a mental illness. And I don't always believe that. It seems that way, especially in adolescence. Man, I've run across so many adolescents and young adults right now. Um, those individuals who went through major life transitions, like the transition from adolescence to adulthood, high school to college or workforce, man, they're seeking to understand why they don't feel quite right. And I have so many. I mean, if you right? So we don't all have access to the DSM because it's, for a fresh paper copy, it's about $200. Um, but we have access to variations online. And somebody just sent me a variation this week. From mayoclinic.com just sent me a few of the criteria for particular personality disorder and said, that's exactly how I'm feeling. Like, well, it's not. And I'll tell you why. But when we seek answers to why we feel discomfort, we can certainly find those answers online in what looks like very professional ways. But even mayoclinic.com or Dr. Google or WebMD only gives you a snippet, a print, a cut and paste from the book. And the problem often is, I can kind of joke about this, right? Like, I'm going to read from the DSM for you for a little bit here, and some of the words there are very specific to to my profession, right? I'll never forget. I loved this course. The course was abnormal psychology, which is an unfortunate name for it, because it really was. It went through back then the entire DSM-4 and broke down the diagnoses, but more importantly, right, not just reaching an understanding of each criteria, but the true scientific definition of some of the words in there that really today seem almost commonplace. And we'll hit some of those words and talk about what the differential diagnoses are. But I just find it kind of ironic that today, with social media and the power of the internet, we're all therapists now. We all get to play armchair psychologist, and think that because some of these words are more common, that we can define them in the scientific and psychological way. But I was thinking about this, and I don't mean to be insulting, please. I don't mean to be territorial either, but I just thought it kind of funny. Like, I would not even dare to try to tell you about military resilience, like our friend Matt Nostalgia talked to us about a few episodes ago. Or, you guys know, if you've listened, there's no way I would try to tell you about the Enneagram like Rabbi B does. That is not my area of expertise. And I sure as heck would not try to preach about biophysical chemistry and molecular structure like Dr. Shu Simon did. That is recognizing my scope of expertise. And that's something that should be very serious in my profession, but I take very seriously. Like, if something is outside my knowledge, the idea of do no harm, I'm not going to try to tell somebody or help somebody with something I don't quite understand. It's like when I go in and do organizational consultation, right? I love the Myers-Briggs. I'm a master certified practitioner and facilitator. I will Myers-Briggs the heck out of that place. But if you want me to come in and do consultation about your financial performance and profit, profit loss statements, like, that's not within my area of expertise, and it would be unethical, probably illegal for me to do that. But again, because we have so many people out there sharing information that they have maybe their own personal understanding of, or maybe maybe a minimal understanding of, we gather that information in a search to understand ourselves, and it just might not always be good information. And I can tell you, when it comes to that word that's thrown out a lot in our times, narcissism, I started doing a little bit more, can't call it research because it's not scientific. So I did some more Googling on narcissism, and it quite literally made me sick, made me rather ill. First of all, I don't think I told you this in episode 65, the last time I talked about narcissism. Somebody I worked with talked to me about how they had been casually labeled. Boy, that's frustrates me just having to say that. Literally casually labeled by a former partner, lover, as a narcissist. And I said, man, I'm just curious, and kept coming up with seemingly positive references and definitions, gaslighting and ghosting and all these new phrases that are certainly not in the DSM-5, nor were they in the DSM-4. I'm like, where the hell is this coming from? And so this individual actually found the website their partner was pulling this from. I'm like, man, I got to take a deep dive into this. And I did. And it's sick. Um, this is an individual. Fortunately, I don't have access to that website anymore because I didn't save it to my whatever likes or whatever, my stars. And I wasn't going to go back and ask the individual for it just to make myself angry again. But so of course I started Googling and I found more things that annoyed me. But this individual that had just a prolific amount of information about what she was a female, she thought was narcissism. As I looked deeper, and this was on that website where she was promoted herself as an expert in the field, had been married 3 times and somehow had managed that each one of those was a narcissist. Now, I'm about to tell you from the DSM, that's statistically impossible. There's no way. If I can't remember, I'll tell you, it's 3 to 4% of the population may be narcissists. Like this person should be playing the lottery more often and could be a 10-time billionaire if they are that statistically fortunate to accomplish something like this. 3 times and you run into a narcissism each time, at some point you got to turn that finger back on you that's pointing out everybody else and wonder what it is about you. All right, so that was just one fact about the individual. The thing that really frustrated me that I didn't dive too deep into because I didn't want to stare too deep into the abyss. Um, the person's profession, was a marketer, educated, and had worked in marketing for a long time. And oh God, as I talk to you about it, it just burns my soul. That they formulated this unprofessional opinion of what narcissism is, marketed the heck out of it. And now there are people that are frustrated with their partner, usually women frustrated with their male partners, because statistically narcissists are more often male, that find this information because it's so well marketed and cling on to it and then casually diagnose their partner in this horrific way. And then on top of that, I found out just as I was preparing for today's podcast that now you can go out, any one of you listening right now can become a narcissist assistant. I can't remember the middle word, but you can become a narcissism coach. That's right. Within only a week of moderately to mildly intense training, you can go coach people who might be struggling with one of the most significant diagnoses in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Now, again, I do feel like I'm being a little territorial here, so forgive me. I don't want to appear narcissistic. But this idea of coaching versus counseling or intense intervention. Look, I do coaching, right? But I do coaching because I was trained in psychotherapy, and therefore I see coaching as a more mild form, a different kind of form, a different focus. One that focuses on goals, objectives, behavior to get there, things like that. Narcissism is a personality disorder deep within the structures of the human personality. To say that within just a couple days you can become a coach in this is insulting. As I've shared with you, I spent 5 years in undergraduate study of psychology. Yes, most do 4, but I really liked college a lot. So I took 5 years because I really liked studying. 2 more years in counseling psychology focus, right? 2 intense years studying only psychology. 2 years, 2 years, and then did 3 more years for my doctorate. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. 10 years post high school study in identifying and helping in this. But now anybody listening, regardless of your background, can go become a coach in this in under a month. Do you see where there might be some disparity in what happens there? So, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I do feel like I'm treading dangerously close on being a little bit possessive of the keys to the castle of the profession of the DSM. So I hope I don't come off as arrogant or narcissistic in any way. But so let's do this. Since I am not the sole possessor of the keys to the castle of the DSM-V-TR, what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize this screen. Oh, that's the other cool thing. So when it came, I don't know if it's a frustration with the DSM. Maybe it's just because I'm cheap. Like going out to buy one of those, no kidding. I think it's like $200 on Amazon for a wrapped brand new paper edition, right? You can get used ones, but as I looked at the reviews, the problem was some of these supposedly used ones were either bad copies, like there's supposed to be a QR code on the back. They were just inappropriately printed copies that don't have all the correct information in it. So I was like, there is no way I'm going to buy a reprint, excuse me, or a used copy. And I wasn't going to drop $200 on a brand new copy. So I got the Kindle version, and I'll tell you, I feel pretty good about that because now instead of lugging around a 15-pound book in my backpack for work, um, it's here on my laptop whenever I need it. I can pull it up on my phone. I've got multiple Kindles. So I'm going to read to you a little bit about personality disorders and narcissism today from the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual version 5 revised. So when it comes to personality disorders, right? So right from the first paragraph in the chapter, page 733 of 1050, a personality disorder is an enduring pattern, right? So there's your first term right there. What the hell is an enduring pattern? Of inner experience and behavior. Okay, we all know what behavior is. That deviates markedly. Ooh, there's another one of those phrases. What does deviate mean? That deviates markedly from the norms and expectations of the individual's culture. It is pervasive and inflexible, has an onset in adolescence or early childhood, is stable over time, and leads to distress or impairment. Those 3 lines there are ripe with words that I literally had to sit, like research the definitions of in grad school. Enduring pattern. It's a pattern of behavior that spans your entire life and is often predicted in adolescence by a professional. Inner experience, or what goes on both. It's not just what we're observing, but it's also what goes on internally with the person. And so for the casual observer, for the partner that looks at their husband or partner and says, "Oh, you're a narcissist because of what I see in you," you might have a little bit of a bias, right? Because that person frustrates you, because you perceive them as selfish, you don't necessarily objectively understand their inner experience. And that's okay. But that's where professionals come in, is to try to ask the right questions to understand somebody's inner experience. Let's see. The personality disorder is an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviates markedly from norms and expectations of the individual's culture. So first of all, you have to understand the individual's culture in a variety of ways. Now, there's a pretty significant variable. What is that individual's culture? How do I approach it? Is that their nationality of origin, their family of origin? Is it their socioeconomic status? Is it their gender? It's all of these and more. So then how do we know what deviates markedly if we're just trying to understand a person's culture? That there might be an indication to you why I take generally 3 to 6 months of intense coaching or psychotherapy before I will diagnose somebody with a personality disorder. And even then, hesitantly. So just because your husband or wife or partner or significant other appears selfish and annoys you does not mean that you get to throw the label of narcissism on them. because you read what the term gaslighting means, and I'm sorry, I don't mean you, the listener, but you out there in general, because you read a blog article about gaslighting, which, spoiler alert, isn't even in this diagnostic and statistical manual. These are so many reasons why we should not throw this word around casually. Okay. Is pervasive and inflexible. Pervasive meaning lasting a lifetime, inflexible, this person can't deviate from it. And what I've heard often, I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but I kind of do. Because an individual struggles in a relationship with this supposedly narcissistic person, they throw that label because it's annoying to them. But somehow this person manages to function in the rest of society and life fairly well without issue. Okay, so that would suggest that it's not pervasive and inflexible, right? It has an onset in adolescence or early adulthood. So we start seeing these things, right? It doesn't happen when you're 50, but we start to see these things in early adolescence and adulthood. Now, we don't diagnose them then because as if you've been an adolescent before, you might know that sometimes adolescence feels like you might have a personality disorder as you grow and develop mentally, emotionally, physically, and hopefully spiritually, right? It is stable over time and leads to distress or impairment. That was 3 lines that are so critical in the true diagnosis of personality disorders and narcissism, that we don't seem to always use. All right, so the next line here, just it goes through all the different, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh, no, disregard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 criterion defined personality disorders. And then, of course, because the DSM has to be all encapsulating, there is also an 11th, which is personality change due to another medical condition. Your personality changes. If you'll remember my favorite story from high school, the story of Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was a railroad worker in the late 1800s. He was tamping on a, I don't know, railroad. Something blew up, ran a metal spike right through the front of his brain, right through the frontal lobe, and he survived. But he was never the same because the frontal lobe is the area that controls emotion, that front of your head, where so many football players today seem to struggle from taking too many blows to the head, where boxers suffer because of the punches to that part of their face. That's the part that is responsible for emotional regulation. So if there's an issue there, it might seem like you have a personality disorder. So that would be number 11. And then, of course, other specified personality disorder is pretty much just meant to encapsulate anything else that seems like a personality disorder, but isn't quite. So let's see if I can figure out. Oh, so that's interesting. There we go. Here's how we turn the page here. Let's talk a little bit about the clusters, right? So if we have 10 diagnostics or 10 labels plus 2 other encapsulating ones, how do we break them down? So there are 3 clusters. Cluster A includes paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal personality disorders. What you experience here is individuals with these disorders, that's your odd or eccentric kind of personality disorders. Some of these might appear to be almost schizophrenic in some ways, and that's a difficult, what we call differential diagnosis. Is it schizophrenia, or is it one of these cluster A personality disorders? One way we can often tell is the efficacy, the success of certain medications, but sometimes that's a really hard one to sort through. I'm not going to go, man. This might be a good future podcast. I'm not going to go through it today, but when we talk about cluster A and people appearing odd or eccentric, that doesn't just mean they like dress a little funny, right? Like odd or eccentric behavior is nearly psychotic, psychotic being out of touch with reality, and has very specific clinical terms. Okay, so we don't get to go around saying that people are paranoid or schizophrenic just because they might be a little off. Cluster B, that includes narcissism, as well as antisocial, borderline, and histrionic. These are the individuals that often appear dramatic, right? That's your histrionic and borderline, emotional, or erratic, right? So there's a really fun word there, emotional. Well, we're all emotional, and many of us are in relationships with people that don't always control their emotions well, or sometimes are subject to emotional upheaval, or what some call roller coasters of emotions. That does not mean you can call them antisocial or borderline or narcissistic. Again, these are clinical terms, not just your partner has an off day and therefore you start throwing those around. Not fair. So that's cluster B. We're going to get into narcissism specifically. Cluster C includes, and these are interesting ones, avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive personality disorders. These are individuals that appear anxious or fearful. So the block in the DSM that kind of, that sets everything apart and talks about the criteria, right? So this is where it gets truly scientific and psychological. Here are the criteria, right? So A, the enduring pattern of inner experience of behavior that deviates markedly from expectations of the culture. This pattern is manifested in 2 or more of these 4 following areas, right? So to be diagnosed with a personality disorder, general personality disorder, you have to have 2 of these issues. It's got to be an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviates markedly from the expectations of the culture in cognition, the way we perceive and interpret others, or ourselves, and events, right? So how we think. Affectivity, the range, intensity, lability, and appropriateness of emotional response. If you can define those for me without looking them up, you can diagnose personality disorders, or you've received some training. Interpersonal functioning and impulse control. So these are really serious, right? So just to get down the path to narcissism, we're not even there yet. We are just considering, oh, this might be a personality disorder if 2 of the 4 of these is an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviates markedly from the expectations of the individual's culture. We continue to look at the enduring pattern is inflexible and pervasive. That's criteria B. Criteria C, the enduring pattern leads to clinically significant distress. Again, that's an important phrase. Clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Criteria D, the pattern is stable and of long duration. It didn't start just because this person is in a relationship with you. I made that up. That's true. It's just not in the criteria. And its onset can be traced back to at least adolescence or early adulthood. Again, I'm not joking. Like, just because this person is in a relationship with you doesn't mean, and their behavior changed, doesn't mean you get to diagnose them. The enduring pattern is not better explained as a manifestation or consequence of another mental disorder. We have to look at other things first. One of the most significant issues I see that lead to the casual diagnosis, I think I'm gonna trademark that term, to the casual and common diagnosis of personality disorder, especially narcissism, or even histrionic or avoidant or borderline, is the presence of true trauma that can certainly change the way people operate, as well as just bad parenting history. There are a few of you out there who may have talked to me about your families of origin. And there's a pattern in some parents. And look, I recognize this is my bias because I deal with this on a daily basis, but there is a common undiagnosed course of behavior in some parents, particularly mothers, that if we go with Peterson, the Great and Powerful's definition, right? The Oedipal mother, and that's not just Peterson, right? This goes all the way into Jungian psychology as well as Freudian. The mother who can't let go and who clings in near abusive ways or makes passive aggressive comments, right? We call this Oedipal, not edible, but Oedipal as in Oedipus complex, Oedipus Rex from Greek mythology, Shakespeare. Oh shoot, I forgot where Oedipus comes from. Somebody get back to me on that one, right? But that's the Freudian term that Jung expanded on and Peterson talks about a lot. Your mother is not a narcissist, borderline, or histrionic if she is this kind of clingy, passive aggressive, needy, emotional mother, right? Don't get me wrong. It's not healthy, but it's not a personality disorder. And the reason I want to differentiate that, personality disorders, again, when we talk about how long-standing and pervasive they are, they're just really hard to treat. Unhealthy parenting, even at a later stage in life, is highly treatable with the right interventions, I believe. Okay. So I got a lot of highlights here. I'm going to kind of breeze through some of these because I feel like this is getting a little long-winded already, and my coffee is getting cold. So let's see, diagnostic features. It talks about personality traits. So you got to know what a trait is. They're enduring patterns of perceiving, relating to, and thinking about the environment and oneself that are exhibited in a wide range of social and personal contexts. Only when personality traits are inflexible and maladaptive and, right, a couple ands there, inflexible and maladaptive, and cause significant functional impairment or subjective distress, do they constitute personality disorders? Did anybody count how many potentially clinical words are in there that need to be defined before you throw this phrase around? The essential feature of a personality disorder is an enduring pattern of inner experience. You're probably tired of hearing this, and behavior that deviates markedly from the norms and expectations of the individual's culture and is manifested in at least two of the following areas: cognition, affectivity, interpersonal functioning, or impulse control. That's criterion A. All right, so these highlights just basically break down all the criterion. Yeah, oh, here's an important one. So since I already broke down the different criteria for you, I'm not going to go through this again just because it's my highlight. Are there other ones I missed? Criteria E, not better explained as a manifestation or consequence of another mental disorder. Criteria F, not attributable to physiological effects such as substance abuse or medical condition like head trauma, right? These are two things like it's not a personality disorder if you're high on a substance and it's making you crazy. Or if there's some kind of medical condition like blunt force trauma to the head. All right, so the diagnosis of personality disorders requires, I love this one, requires an evaluation of the individual's long-term patterns of functioning, and the particular personality features must be evident by early adulthood, right? So if you've got a 45-year-old that is, somebody's considering casually diagnosing as a personality disorder or narcissist, it requires somebody to objectively go in and look at a long-term history, right? This can't be just something that happened in the past year. Something changed. Were they subject to PTSD? Are they behaving this way as a result of stress, right? This is long-standing. And I think that's one of the difficult things as a professional. That's why it takes me 3 to 6 months to diagnose this. And why I get frustrated with people that just because their partner is behaving badly or selfishly, don't get me wrong, that's still unacceptable, but we don't throw around personality disorders. Okay. The personality traits that define these disorders must also be distinguished from characteristics that emerge in response to specific situational stressors or more transient mental states like bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, substance intoxication. The clinician should assess the stability of personality traits over time and across different situations. Although a single interview with the individual is sometimes sufficient for making the diagnosis, it is often necessary to conduct a more than one interview and to space these out over time. So even the DSM says you got to give it time and assessment, not just casual interaction and hanging out and getting coffee together, but true assessment. Okay. And sometimes we even use the great big I don't know, 600 questions. I can't remember how many questions the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory has, because I don't use it that much. I send that out to somebody else. But that's the big daddy of assessments that we can be a little bit more definitive, still not 100%, but can really lead us to diagnosing this, right? Let's see. Assessment can also be, oh yeah, there we go. Assessment can also be complicated by the fact that the characteristics that define a personality may not be considered problematic by the individual. The traits are often egocentric. To help overcome this difficulty, supplementary information from other informants may be helpful, or objective assessment like the MMPI. Development and course of a personality disorder. Excuse me, coffee. The features of a personality disorder usually become recognizable during adolescence or early adult life. By definition, a personality disorder is an enduring pattern of thinking, feeling, and behaving that is relatively stable over time. Okay, so this is a fun one. Personality disorder categories may be applied with children or adolescents in those relatively unusual instances in which the individual's particular maladaptive personality traits appear to be pervasive, persistent, and unlikely to be limited to a particular. Basically, what that's saying is we do not diagnose children with personality disorders because their personality is still forming, right? It's just, man, I remember having that literally like pounded into my head. Like, you do not throw out personality disorder diagnoses for anybody younger than 18, and probably not, those first few years. 18 is not a magical number, even though my teenage daughter thinks it is. It's not a magical number. It just means that's closer to personality development being formed, but we're usually looking, 22, 23, 24. Personality is still forming. So we don't throw out personality disorder terms with young people. Oh, the culture-related diagnostic issues, right? Judgment about personality functioning must take into account the individual's ethnic, cultural, and social background. Personality disorders should not be confused with problems associated with acculturation, following migration, or with the expression of habits, customs, or religious and political values based on the individual's cultural background or context. Behavioral patterns that appear to be rigid and dysfunctional aspects of personality disorder may reflect instead adaptive responses to cultural restraints. So this is where you almost have to become a true anthropologist and understand somebody's cultural background and why they behave this way, how they behave this way. This can be something as simple, right? I mean, I know they talk about migration and migrants, but also because this is largely an American European endeavor to label and diagnose these things. That's one of the greatest problems, because we are more than just a U.S. European centric world these days, and we can't just throw these around on people. Man, I could really go in depth with that one, but again, I just don't want to. There's so much danger in mislabeling people, but especially when you don't understand their culture and background. Accuracy of diagnoses can be enhanced by attention to culturally patterned conceptions of self and attachment, assessment biases. Oh, this is a good one. Assessment biases resulting from the clinician's own cultural backgrounds or use of diagnostic instruments that are not normed. Facebook, right? What's an unnormed diagnostic instrument? Any assessment you take on the internet. Anytime you're answering questions on the internet, on Facebook, whatever, that is more than likely not scientifically normed. Now, if you approach me and I send you a Myers-Briggs type indicator on your laptop, that is coming from the Myers-Briggs Institute. Don't get me wrong. There are assessments we can take online, but if you found it yourself and you're taking it, I'm going to bet it's not scientifically normed. Even though I've used 16personalities.com casually at times, it will not give you a valid MBTI report. It will not truly type your Enneagram. So it's fun, but it's not clinical. Sorry, I digress. Instruments that are not normed of the impact of social determinant poverty, a culture of stress, racism, and discrimination on feelings, cognitions, and behavior. It is useful for the clinician, especially when evaluating someone from a different background, to obtain additional information from informants who are familiar with the person's cultural background. I think this is something important we have to look at. Several times here already, it has told us, as a clinician, as a trained professional, with anywhere from 6 to 10 plus years of education and hopefully more experience, that we, in making these diagnoses, should ask for additional outside information, scientific assessment, other relationship information, things like that. So that just screams to me that the casual observer, even if you're living with somebody that is selfish or frustrating, and you have time with them, doesn't mean you're qualified to make that diagnosis. In fact, your qualifications are compromised because you are in close proximity and intimate relationship with that person, and your evaluation is subjective. If you worry about these things with somebody you care about, seek, this sounds trite, but find a professional, and find a good professional. Sometimes find a couple professionals, because that goes back to that idea that we're human too, and we may have our own biases. And I can think of a few professionals that I know. Sorry, they may not. They may have had their own difficult relationship experiences, and therefore might be angry at particular. The professional that diagnoses an individual from their partner's information without ever meeting them is unethical. There, I said it. If you're that professional, come at me, bro. Let's talk about, seriously though. I mean, we're human. We have our biases, and we need to recognize those, or we have to have good consultation and supervision where other people point that out to us. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can tell I'm wearing the Duke's Hawaii sweatshirt, which usually means it's supervision day for Dr. Dan. That means I get together with other therapists and talk about some of the difficult situations I'm working with, and ask for guidance, like, hey, am I seeing this right? Am I doing this right? And sometimes the answer is yeah, but maybe you should try this. And sometimes the answer is, oh my goodness, what are you thinking? Fortunately, with my years of experience, that doesn't happen as much, but sometimes it still does. So I mean, I'm honored today. We get a rare appearance from the wonderful psych consultant, psychologist, MMPI expert who brought me into private practice some 10 or 15 years ago. So we don't get to see her often. She is well into her retirement, but you can bet I'm going to bounce a lot of these ideas around with her. So anyway, I digress again. Let's see. The clinician must be cautious in diagnosing personality disorders during an episode of depressive or anxiety, right? If you're depressed or anxious, we can't be throwing around personality disorders because that's not quite fair. These conditions may have cross-sectional symptom features that mimic personality traits and that may make it more difficult to evaluate retrospectively the individual's long-term patterns of functioning. Here's one, right? PTSD, when personality changes emerge and persist after an individual has been exposed to extreme stress, a diagnosis of PTSD should be considered, not a personality diagnosis or personality disorder diagnosis. So let me, I was going to just pause the recording here, but that would be too much of a pain. So give me a second as I fast forward through cluster A up to cluster B, and narcissism, while I take a sip of my coffee. Oh, that is good stuff. As I search, I'll tell you a story. A couple weeks ago, I was in, for those of you that longtime listeners, my love of Black Rifle Coffee and their service to veterans and what they do. First of all, it's great coffee. Second of all, it's an amazing cause. But I was down in Texas where I didn't realize, I knew they had like Black Rifle stores, where you can go get coffee and things and have your coffee made for you. And it was amazing. It just happened to find, great thanks to, as you've heard, Chief Petty Officer retired Joseph Paul, who should be back on the podcast sometime soon, took me to the first Black Rifle Coffee establishment. And we also got to attend a grand opening of another Black Rifle Coffee while I was down there. So total coffee nerdness for me. They had a coffee drink that I've never had anywhere before, which was really cool. They called it a Smoky Joe, which was a either hot or cold latte. Latte just meaning espresso with either hot milk or cold milk. But the flavoring, because we all know when we drink that kind of coffee, they put a little bit of flavoring in there. The flavoring was a smoked hickory syrup, which made the smoke to it. So that's what I have in my coffee today. You know, I hopped on Amazon and bought the heck out of that stuff. So I have smoked coffee this morning. But I digress again. Now I have reached the section of narcissistic personality disorders. So many highlights here. I feel like I'm talking your ear off. So I'm going to try to make this brief and just point out why you, as a listener to the Meaning Project podcast, but you or anybody you know that does not carry a license in counseling, psychology, or social work, or a doctorate, should not be casually diagnosing people. Okay, and again, I hope I'm not sounding elitist, because that is on the edge of narcissism, and I just don't want to be that guy. Diagnostic criteria. As you've heard this phrase, it's a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, need for admiration, and lack of empathy. You guys, that's an important one that you have to understand just what the heck that means. That is so intensely clinical. Excuse me. Beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following out of these 9. All right, has a grandiose sense of self-importance. In other words, exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements. Right, this is the person that thinks they get to go to the front of the line just because they are who they are. Right. These are people who are preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. I think the key term there is preoccupied. This isn't just somebody that says, man, if I won the lottery tomorrow, I'd do this. Or what it is, again, as Peterson, the great and powerful, says, I need to talk to him about this. That's not going to happen. But he is throwing out the big N, narcissism, to those Instagram influencers that are focused only on beauty and preoccupied with showing that. So we might have DSM-5 was written well before the proliferation of social media. So this might be something we see here in the future, this idea of unlimited beauty. But the idea of preoccupied, that's all they do all day is focus on these things. It's not about just, yeah, man, it might really be those Insta-face people that are throwing out video upon video upon video showing themselves and their makeup and filters and workout habits. But that's another topic. Believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high status people or institutions, right? These people that they feel like they can only deal with the best of the best of the best, right? And have no reason to. Require excessive admiration, has a sense of entitlement, unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations. Now look, just because you have a teenager doesn't mean you have a narcissist. But we know that sense of entitlement and the idea of automatic compliance with expectations, that is developmentally appropriate in teenagers. And hopefully they grow out of it, or you can parent them out of it. But just because they achieve diagnostic criteria number 5 does not mean your teen is a narcissist, okay? It'll be all right. They have to have, again, 5 out of these 9. Number 6, interpersonally exploitive, takes advantage of others to achieve his or her ends, lacks empathy, right? This is the person that's unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others, completely just can't pay attention to empathy, can't empathize. Envious of others or believes that others are envious of him or her, shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. right? So 5 out of those 9, just because somebody's selfish and maybe struggles to understand or validate your feelings, that's different from empathy, right? It's just it's so intense to diagnose somebody with this compared to how casually we are throwing that label around these days. And I guess I take it, I don't know, it makes me incredibly sad when I hear that thrown around. When people apply it to themselves, I've seen that a few times, um, because they're seeking answers and they casually interpret some of these criteria to be able to say, "Oh man, that's exactly how I feel," or uh, that's one I quickly help people dispel. Like, no, you're not a narcissist. Stop it. Um, but I think the greatest sadness I've seen is in the partner that diagnoses her spouse or partner or loved one with narcissism and then ends a relationship over it. And very often, look, it's nearly impossible to have a relationship with a true narcissist. But if you're in a relationship with somebody for 20 or 30 years and then you finally had enough of their stuff, um, that doesn't mean they're a narcissist. That means maybe you've both changed to the relationship and you need some good therapy or counseling or something like that. I have so many highlights. If you want to find out more about all my highlights, maybe I'll print them out sometime and put them in format, but I'm not going to break down. I mean, the next bit really breaks down those criteria. Let's talk about prevalence. This is important. So prevalence is a scientific number, right? This isn't just casual. The estimated prevalence of narcissistic personality disorder based on a probability subsample from part 2 of the National Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's scientific. The prevalence of narcissistic personality disorders in the National Epidemiological Survey on Alcohol and Related Conditions was 6.2%. A review of 5 epidemiological studies, 4 of them in the United States, found a median prevalence of 1.6%. Well, that defies everything we see on Dr. Google and WebMD and Facebook and InstaTwit and all this stuff, right? Because according to the internet, anybody you see out there that you don't necessarily agree with is a narcissist. But the science says that's anywhere from 1.6 to 6.2%. Going back to that nice marketing lady who somehow managed to marry 3 narcissists, like, it's statistically impossible. And so maybe that's something to look at, is like, it just can't be as prevalent as what the internet has us think. Now, are there unhealthy people out there in difficult relationships making poor decisions? Absolutely. If there wasn't, I wouldn't have a job, or I'd need to find a different job, maybe podcasting. But that doesn't mean they have personality disorders. That just means they're engaging in unhealthy behavior and need a little bit of guidance, right? So stop throwing around personality disorders. One of the things I like to encourage people to do, we don't have to label these things. We don't have to label people. Define the behavior. Hey, I really don't appreciate when you act this way. It seems selfish to me. That's great. That's healthy. That's communication. But just getting annoyed or angry with somebody and saying you're a narcissist doesn't really help the relationship or the conversation. So let's see if there's any more. All right, so that is the end of my highlights. Development, of course, since childhood, culture related. Yeah, we've really touched on a lot of those. But I think the important thing for this podcast was, first of all, identifying what it means to have a personality disorder and going through those criteria. And hopefully you understand like what the intensity is. And just, I don't even know if it's intensity. Like, again, it really is about education and experience. No joke. Those of us that are out there doing these diagnosing and doing this work have been through intense education. And just think about, like, literally some of those words that I threw out there today, like, we had to spend quite a bit of time in school identifying what those mean and understanding, If you have to achieve 5 out of 9 criteria, imagine in each one of those criteria that I listed for you, the different words that we have to define that people achieve there. And that's, again, I think that's one of those things that I'm running up against is so many people looking for understanding of themselves will read those criteria because oh, I hate to even tell you this, but they're available on WebMD. You can look them up. But that doesn't always mean we can understand it. Again, going back to my joke about I would never try to read a biophysical chemistry and molecular structure book and think I understand a dang thing about what it says. You know, I've tried to read Stephen Hawking before. I tried to listen to it because I'm not smart enough to read it. So I tried listening to it, and that even made my head spin. I didn't understand half the words in each sentence. And I think the difference here is in the work of psychology because human beings have such a need to understand themselves. We put this information out for popular consumption, and unfortunately, it's like trying to read Stephen Hawking, The History of the Universe, or heck, I don't even know what books I have there, right? I don't even have the books that I don't understand there. But we have them on the internet. We may not truly understand them, but we throw those words out there. We apply them to ourselves or others, and we think it's scientific, and it's not. If you're concerned about these things, you know, talk to me. Hit me up with an email. I'll help you find a therapist in your area. Or if you want to do some Zoom work, I can do Zoom work with you. Or in the next couple months, you'll have a Dr. Dan course up on the website at some point. But please don't throw around casual diagnoses. Identify behavior that you're frustrated with and those that you love or in relationship with. Maybe you don't love them anymore because of their qualities, but if you want to have a relationship with them, you can identify the behaviors, encourage them to change. Maybe you need to look at your own behaviors and change them. But we can't throw around these very strong words and hope to remain in healthy relationships with other people. So, all right, I think I don't even have a timer on the record button here, so I'm sorry if that went long. I'm sorry if I got up on my soapbox. I hope you found that helpful and informative and meaningful. If, as always, if you want to find out about more about me or what I do or what I'm doing or the upcoming course, you can look me up on danielafranz.com, DanielAFranz.com. All the socials are there, links to the podcast, links to the YouTube, blog posts, all that fun stuff. I love sharing this information, and I hope you enjoy receiving it. So as always, thank you for this opportunity to bring a little bit of mental health and meaning to your day. Hey, I hope it's a great day. Take care.